Jalen Warley went from Virginia to Gonzaga. Could he get any of his 7 teammates currently in the transfer portal to follow him out to Spokane?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy April. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. Well, folks, back at home after being in the Amazon studios for Amazon Fire TV, the bracket breakdown shows. If you missed those, check them out. If you have an Amazon Fire TV stick, just go turn it on, check it out. You can find it on their bracket breakdown is what it's called. Myself, my co-host for Locked On College Basketball, Isaac Shade. We also had Gordon Hayward, Monique Billings, Kylan Mills, Tanitra Batista. It was an incredible 3 straight weekends in Dallas filming these shows, but back home now. Apologies for the slight delay in getting this show out. Wanted to talk about the Virginia players in the transfer portal. Obviously, we know that Coach Tony Bennett retired about 12 days before the Virginia season started. And I bring them up for a couple of reasons. One, Jalen Warley was, of course, on that Virginia roster. While he never played for Virginia as he entered the transfer portal before the season began after Coach Bennett departed, he was with that team in the summer. He's friends with these guys. He was teammates with them. And so I think there's a bit of a potential pull to get some of those players to potentially come to Spokane if he is able to kind of put on a little bit of a recruiting hat. So I wanted to kind of go through the list. And when I first came up with this idea, the 2 main players I wanted to focus on were Jacob Cofie and Blake Buchanan. Now, Blake Buchanan is from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, pursued by Gonzaga out of high school, ended up committing to Iowa State over the weekend. Life moves pretty fast. So if you don't get your shows out right away, that's the kind of thing that ends up happening. So we won't talk about Cofie. We had a few other players on the list. Day Ames has committed to Cal about an hour before I hit the record button. So we won't be talking about him. We still talk about Cofie, who's from Seattle, who wanted to go to Gonzaga out of high school, or at least wanted to be pursued by Gonzaga. We'll talk about him first. We'll talk about a guard from Canada in the second segment. Gonzaga loves their Canadian guards, so perhaps there's a connection there. And we'll talk about the rest of the transfers from Virginia in the third segment. We're going to do a lot of these kind of things, trying to hammer out as many transfer targets that we can talk about for Gonzaga at a time. Later in this week, we'll talk about Bryce Lindsey from James Madison, Isaiah Pasha from Delaware, who are being pursued by Gonzaga. Rodney Rice from Maryland is a big one as we kind of get more and more into this portal season. And we'll continue our season in review series, talking about every player on Gonzaga's roster as well. Lots to get to this offseason as we get into it here. We're going to start here with Jacob Cofie, 6'10" sophomore forward, who's from Eastside Catholic High School in Bellevue, Washington. He grew up in Sammamish, so he's a West Side kid. We've seen plenty of players have success at Gonzaga who were from the Seattle area. It's very common, obviously. Corey Kispert, Gary Bell, Stephen Gray, a few notable examples. Nolan Hickman, a more recent example, of course. He was a 4-star forward coming out of high school. Eastside Catholic is a sports powerhouse, has been for a long time. And he didn't get interest from Gonzaga. He mentioned wanting to go on a visit there. So I'm not sure what the situation there, if the staff just felt they didn't have any needs at the front court or something. I don't know exactly what the situation was, but he's certainly boosted his stock since then. He committed to Virginia, stayed there for his freshman season, obviously, despite Tony Bennett's kind of surprise retirement before the season began. And he was great. He played 32 games for the Cavs. 16 of them he started, played about 21 minutes per game as a freshman, averaged just over 7 points, 4.5 rebounds, 1.1 steals, 1 assist, and just under 1 block per game. Very efficient 2-point scorer on about 4.5 2-point attempts per game. He shot just under 57%. He was not a great 3-point shooter. That's an area of his game that I think there's potential there. He was scouted as somebody who could be a stretch 4. He took 1.3 3-point attempts per game, so he was willing to shoot threes, but he only shot 24.5%. That's obviously not a positive right now, but I also don't think it's a negative yet. I think that the shot looks good. The form looks good. He was a 75% free throw shooter. I think that the opportunity for him to become a player who can score in 3 different levels, who can score around the rim, who can space the floor, who can convert at the free throw line, I think it's absolutely there. But frankly, Jacob Cofie's best assets, best attributes for Gonzaga are on the defensive end of the floor. He's a tremendous on and off ball defender. He was top 10 in the ACC in steal percentage, where he was 5th, and block percentage, where he was 9th. So again, using the percentages helps in terms of just, 1.1 steals and 0.8 blocks doesn't exactly jump off the page, but in 21 minutes per game, I think those rate stats kind of help showcase a little bit more of how impactful he was defensively for this Virginia team. He began his career with 3 straight point games scoring in double figures. One of them was against Campbell. One of them was against Coppin State. The other one was against Villanova. He had a career game against Notre Dame in the conference play. He had 17 points and 6 rebounds. And again, I think just looking at his fit at Gonzaga, it's pretty obvious to see how Cofie could fit here. One, he's from Seattle. He liked Gonzaga coming out of high school. Like, the obvious for Cofie would be coming back closer to home, playing for a program that he, had a lot of respect for in high school. Again, I think all of that is fairly clear. And then for Gonzaga, they have room. They have room in the front court for an addition like Cofie, and they have a need for defensive presence on this roster. Right now, assuming there's no other moves, which as of right now, there have not been any other moves. Graham Ike has not made a decision either way publicly about whether he's coming back to Gonzaga or whether he is going to move on with his professional career, but we're kind of assuming it's going to be one of those two things. Braden Huff has not entered the transfer portal. Yes, I hear the Wisconsin rumors. I know they're loud. Braden Huff has not entered the transfer portal. I have not been given any reason to believe that he is going to enter the transfer portal. That doesn't mean that he won't. I just have not seen any indication that that's going to happen. So my assumption as of right now is that Graham Ike, Braden Huff, and Ismaila Diani will all be back. But even if that is the case, that is the best case scenario for Gonzaga in terms of maintaining their current roster. There's still room because Ben Gregg is graduating and Mike Lejaye is in the transfer portal. I don't expect him to come back. So you have room, and adding a defensive presence who can play the 4, who can score around the rim, and who can step out a little bit. Again, I don't think Cofie's a great 3-point shooter yet, but his ability to play that 4 position, I think, is there. And I think he could, with an offseason to work on it, he could get better at making that entry pass and kind of playing that role that Gonzaga needs him to play. I think that front court defense is a huge need for Gonzaga. Ismaila Diani obviously has shown flashes of being a legitimate rim protector in the sense that, in a way that Gonzaga hasn't really had since Chet, since Brandon Clark before that, since maybe Austin Day. They've had decent bigs like, Shemek Karnowski, who's huge and knew how to use his size, but they haven't really had good rim protection. Cofie's more of an off-ball, a help defender. He's better in that area, but that's still a need for Gonzaga. I think they haven't really had that either. So a young, tall, athletic, 6'10" help defender who can also score efficiently around the rim. I mean, that's a jackpot. That's a slam dunk for Gonzaga. So this to me is the biggest fish that Gonzaga could get. Outside of Isaac McNeely, he's the best player from Virginia who's in the transfer portal. We'll talk about him in the third segment briefly, but he seems like he's fairly locked into 2 different schools right now. Gonzaga is not on that list, but Cofie, I think, would be a huge win for the Zags, and I think he's not getting as much attention as perhaps he should. This is a guy who early in the season was starting to creep his way onto draft boards a little bit and kind of faded as the season went on, but he's so young and he's got so many tools and tantalizing upside, and we've seen what Gonzaga has done with young bigs who have upside. I mean, their track record of development is otherworldly. What the development we've seen of the Drew Timmies of the world, the Killian Tillys of the world, the Shemek Karnowskis of the world, the Braden Huff of the world, a guy who was not even barely a top 100 prospect, who's already developed into such a good player for Mark Few and the Zags. Like the development track record for Gonzaga bigs is as good as anybody in the country. Truly, truly is. So no wonder Cofie wanted to come here out of high school. If Gonzaga's interested in him and bringing him home, I think this is an easy choice for the Zags if both parties are interested. And I'm keeping a close eye on this one. Well, as we said, the Zags missed on Coeur d'Alene native Blake Buchanan, who left Virginia for Iowa State. But there's some other Virginia targets the Zags could pursue, including a Canadian point guard who we're going to talk about here in just a second. But first, folks, March Madness is here, dying down, but FanDuel is still giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet wins. The extra $200 that you can use on everything from the buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories. We're kind of out on those. And even who's cutting down the nets on April 6th. On FanDuel, when you win, you get paid instantly, so no waiting around. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always exciting action to get in on. Right now, Duke plus 110 to win the national championship. Florida's next at plus 270. Houston, after that, a plus 400. And then Auburn, folks, Auburn came in as the number one overall seed. They have the worst odds among the one seeds at plus 500. Might be worth taking a look at some of those odds there for this national championship. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking about the 7 players who are available currently in the transfer portal out of Virginia, Tony Bennett's program, previous program. Obviously, he has left the program, and then Ron Sanchez was the head coach for this year on an interim basis, and now they've hired Ryan Odom, who's a fantastic coach. I think Virginia's going to be back in business, but no surprise to see the roster turning over, and with Warley having already come from Virginia to Spokane, I think there's a chance he could maybe convince some other guys to follow suit. We talked about Jacob Cofie in the first segment. We know Blake Buchanan, who is a former Gonzaga target, has already committed to Iowa State, but I want to talk about a guy who is going to get a lot less attention in the portal, and certainly not the sexiest addition that Gonzaga could make or will make. But as we talked about on a show last week, one of the areas Gonzaga needs to shore up is guard depth. I think they need a potential starting guard, a high-level scoring wing to kind of play the 2 position alongside. We expect Braden Smith. The Colgate transfer is going to start at the 1. I expect Jalen Warley is probably going to start at the 3, and Emmanuel Innocente will certainly be in the mix. But those 3 guys, if there's your starters, there's just not a lot of scoring right there. So I think they need some high-level scoring, but outside of that, they need depth in the guard room. And there's a 6'5" guard from Ontario, Fort Erie, Ontario specifically, who played at Virginia last year, named Ishan Sharma. And I think he's worth keeping an eye on. Again, Canadian guards, Gonzaga's had a plethora of them. The Nemhards, of course, Kevin Pangos, they have had so many great guards, great players from Canada, and the pipeline is so strong right now. I think that's very much worth keeping an eye on. Of course, we already talked about the Warley connection. And Sharma's a guy who didn't get a lot of attention out of high school. He was a 3-star guard. He accepted an offer from Virginia way back in October of 2023 and just didn't really get pursued by a whole lot of other power conference caliber programs. Obviously, he'd committed to this program way before Tony Bennett retired, didn't suddenly enter the portal ahead of his freshman year, which would have been very tough for him to do. So he was kind of set being with the Cavs for this year, but he had a pretty solid year. He played in 20 games for Virginia this year. He made 1 start. He played about 13 minutes per game. So again, he was coming off the bench behind Day-Day Ames, behind the rest of Isaac McNeely, the rest of that guard room for Virginia. He averaged about 3.5 points per game, 1.3 boards, little under 1 assist, shot only 33% on 2-pointers, but he only attempted a 2-point shot per game. He was not a 2-point scorer. What he was a 3-point scorer. His efficiency there was only minimal as well, 33%, but he did take 2.5 threes per game. And again, that was in 13 minutes per game. So the dude was shooting a lot of threes. 2.5 threes per game in about 13 minutes. That's a pretty decent volume when you kind of extrapolate it out to more like 30-ish minutes per game. Not that he's going to play that at Gonzaga necessarily, but the shooting, I think, is there. Even with a 33%, which I know is not great, I think you can probably expect that to increase in an offense where there's more floor spacing and more ball movement than you get at Virginia. He also was a 94% three-point or free throw shooter, so I think that the expectation that the jump shot is going to improve after his freshman year is pretty easy to kind of make that expectation for him. He had some nice games as well, 12 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists in 26 minutes against Bethune-Cookman early in the year. His lone start this season was against Stanford. He played 32 minutes against the Cardinals, 6 points, 3 boards, 3 assists in that game. And look, I get the stats are not popping off the page, but I think it's worth acknowledging that Emmanuel Innocente's stats did not pop off the page in his time at Tarleton State, and he came in and was immediately productive. It's less about the stats and more about what are the skill sets that you provide. And for Sharma, he's a bigger guard. He's 6'4", 6'5", so he's got the size that I think Mark Few and their staff are really prioritizing after this era of the small guard era of Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman. Caleb Battle was a little bit bigger, but they still just didn't have a ton of size in that backcourt, and teams that found ways to abuse that were a problem for Gonzaga all season long. So I think you can tell with Davis Fogel coming in at 6'7", Jalen Warley's 6'7". Braden Smith's not particularly big, but you have more size in this backcourt with Innocente and Warley and Fogel. They're all 6'5" or taller. And most of the players Gonzaga has pursued in the portal, the guy Trayson Eaglestaff, who they pursued, who went to South Carolina, he was 6'6". They have their eyes on Rodney Rice. They have their eyes on Isaiah Pasha and Bryce Lindsey from James Madison, and those guys are all like 6'4", 6'5". Like they're looking at bigger guards. They want to add a little length and size to their backcourt. Sharma has that. He's played in a high-level program at Virginia. He's displayed some outside shooting ability. He was a quality defender, and he's in a program that prioritizes defense in a major way. And it's just he fits a need that Gonzaga has as a backup guard. So to me, I think there's a lot to like here. I think when Gonzaga adds a backup guard, and Sharma's not a great passer. He's more of like a backup 2. I think that the question of whether he could run the point is a fair and legitimate one, and he didn't do it very much at Virginia. So I do think that is a question that the staff would have, is like, if we're bringing him in, are we also going to then go get a point guard because he's more of a backup 2? And if so, does that mean we would rather prioritize somebody who can play the 1 and the 2? That's a little bit more versatility. Those are questions the staff has to answer. From watching clips of him and looking at his numbers, I can't tell you exactly how capable he is as a point guard. That's what the staff is expected to do and kind of figure out. But I think if they feel comfortable, like, this is the kind of player Gonzaga is going to add. I feel confident in saying that they're going to add a backup point guard who's not going to be a sexy name in the portal. Hopefully they'll get some of those sexy names. We'll talk about some of the bigger names as the offseason goes on, and as we see Gonzaga connected to some of those big names, like they were with Donovan Dent, who went to UCLA, or like they were with Owen Freeman, who went to Creighton. But they're going to also get some names that aren't necessarily the biggest names. And this is a player who I think fits the archetype that Gonzaga is looking for: bigger guard, younger guard who can develop in the system. I think there's a lot of things about Sharma here that could make sense to be in this system behind Smith, behind Innocente, behind Warley, and kind of getting a chance to learn the ropes and play in a different system and kind of continue that pipeline of Canadian guards coming to Gonzaga, because I think there's a lot of upside here in Sharma. Well, there's 6 other who's that are in the transfer portal, or excuse me, 5 other who's that are in the portal. Again, this morning there were 6, but Data Ames committed to Cal. So we're going to talk about the other players. None of them have Pacific Northwest ties. None of them have Canada ties necessarily, but there are some possible fits here. So we're going to talk about that to close out the show, coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking about the Virginia Cavaliers in the transfer portal, with the connection being Jalen Warley, who of course spent all summer working out with Virginia's roster and decided to transfer after Tony Bennett retired, came to Gonzaga. He's been here since the start of the second semester. And I think that there's a chance he could maybe pull a few strings here and maybe see if he can get some of his teammates out here. We talked about Jacob Cofie in the first segment, clearly the best target for Gonzaga in terms of team needs and in terms of his potential interest in joining the program as somebody who's from the Seattle area. We talked about Ishan Sharma in the second segment, a guard who I think makes some sense for Gonzaga to pursue as a depth option backup point guard type. We talked about how Blake Buchanan is unfortunately no longer a target after he committed to Iowa State. So now what I want to do is talk about the rest of the players from Virginia who are in the portal. Maybe not as obvious of connections to Gonzaga in the short term, but again, the Warley connection is there. And RJ Barsh recruited a lot of players on the East Coast when he was at Florida State. I think there's going to be some overlap with some of these guys as well. So want to go through these 5 players to close out the show. Again, we're going to have more shows like this, more transfer portal conversation, as we expect Gonzaga to be insanely active in the portal this spring and into the summer with so many holes to fill on the roster. We'll start with Isaac McNeely. And folks, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, so we'll just be quick here. Isaac McNeely already visited Louisville, and while he was on his visit at Louisville, the expectation was that he was going to commit, and then Tennessee kind of swooped in and said, hey, we could really use you, Mr. McNeely. We'd love to have a call with you, set something up. So McNeely left his visit at Louisville without committing and is now checking out Tennessee. Not a great sign for Louisville, a better sign for Tennessee, definitely not a good sign for anybody else who is potentially pursuing McNeely. We know North Carolina was in the mix. Seems like they've kind of fallen out of favor. I don't know how much Gonzaga pursued him, but he's a 6'4" guard who averaged 14.5 points per game and shot 42% from 3 on 7.5 attempts per game. Very easy to see why he would be a tremendous target, not just for Gonzaga, but for anybody. And everybody can use a guard who can score. If you can score 14.5 points per game in Virginia's system, and you may be thinking, well, it wasn't Tony Bennett last year. They played the same style. They played the same super slow pace style, and he averaged 14.5 points per game. That is incredibly difficult to do. And he shot 42% from 3. He's not going to Gonzaga, unfortunately, barring a huge turn of events. Not that that's unprecedented, but this is the kind of top tier player I would love for Gonzaga to get. even if he's coming from a mid-major program, somebody who averaged 15, 16 points per game, shot that volume of threes at that efficiency, that is an absolute slam dunk. Huge potential type of addition. Sounds like Louisville or Tennessee is going to get a great one here. But again, the type of player that I would like to see Gonzaga pursue at the top end of the transfer portal market. Next up for Virginia players is Andrew Rohde, 6'6" guard. He's from Brookfield, Wisconsin initially. He started his career at St. Thomas, Minnesota, averaged 17 points a game as a freshman, and that was enough for Virginia to say, yes, please, we will take you from the mid-major ranks and bring you up to our program. As you expect in Virginia's slow-paced offense and going from a small school like St. Thomas, who's only very recently been at the D1 level, Rohde was not nearly as productive. His first season at Virginia, he averaged just 4.5 points and about 2.7 assists. Those numbers climbed his second season with Virginia this past year, where he averaged 9.3 points, over 4 assists, while shooting 41% from three. Rohde makes a lot of sense for Gonzaga. He's a 6'6" guard. Now he's a senior, so he's not that developmental piece, which I think is an area you wish he had a couple of years that you could potentially develop him. But he's a 6'6" guard who averaged over 4 assists per game last year and shot over 40% from three. Like, that's a great guard. I don't think he'd be a backup. I think if you were Gonzaga would have to. I don't think they're promising starting jobs, but I think he'd probably come in and start at the 2, and then you'd have kind of two point guard types, because Rohde, obviously averaging over 4 assists per game in Virginia's system, he was the primary ball handler. He was distributing the ball. He's a great passer and shooter and scorer. And I think having him alongside Braden Smith gives you kind of a 2-point guard vibe, which we know is Gonzaga's bread and butter. From their 2 championship teams have started 2 point guards. And so I think that there's a lot of logical fit here. I think Rohde is probably looking to get closer to home in the Midwest, maybe Wisconsin, maybe Minnesota, somewhere like that. But certainly somebody that I think if Gonzaga were to pursue him and make a compelling offer, perhaps they could swing him all the way out here to Spokane and land a player that I think would be a big time piece for them. A couple other guys in the portal from Virginia. Again, we mentioned Daide Ames, who I'm not sure he would have been a great fit, but he's at Cal anyway. Staying in the ACC, but literally traveling across the country. What a weird time to be alive watching the transfer portal. A player can go from Virginia to Cal and still compete against the same teams. Just a weird thing. 3 more guys to talk about. We'll start with Anthony Robinson, 6'10" sophomore forward from Peachtree City, Georgia. That is a great name for a town. Averaged 3.5 points, 2.5 boards in about 9 minutes per game last year. Very efficient, 72% from the field, as you would expect from a pretty low volume scorer. 62% from the free throw line, though. Not an outside shooter, not a floor spacer, not really somebody connected to the West Coast at all. Wouldn't expect Gonzaga to be super involved here, but he's a 6'10" big man who's young, who played at a high major program. So there's always at least some level of like, should we at least, kick the tires on this or take a look? And it's kind of, maybe Warley can say, hey, this is a kid who I think has some upside, and pull some strings to see about convincing the staff on him. Next up is TJ Power. And TJ Power is an interesting case. He's potentially a name you've heard if you follow college basketball recruiting pretty closely. He was a top 20 recruit in the 2023 class, and he went to Duke. And he was a freshman at Duke, not this past season or this current season, but the season previous to that. And he was part of a great Duke freshman class, and he never really got off the floor. They had Mark Mitchell, they had Kyle Filipowski on that team, and they just didn't really have room for him to play much. And he didn't play much. He averaged like less than a point a game, didn't really do much. Was kind of billed as this like 6'9" stretch 4. He's a 6'9" forward from Massachusetts. And as you may know, Duke landed another 6'9" forward from Massachusetts this year, a little bit better than TJ Power. His name's Cooper Flagg. You probably heard of him. And that was part of the reason that Power hit the portal after the season. He was like, they're bringing in Flagg, they're bringing in Malawach, they're bringing in all these guys who are going to kind of I'm not going to get to play, and he was one of many players. Mark Mitchell at the portal, went to Missouri. Sean Stewart hit the portal, went to Ohio State. And some of those guys had success. Mark Mitchell was very good for a Missouri team that was resurgent after a bad year in the SEC. They came back and made the tournament and were a top 10 team at one point, and Mark Mitchell was a big part of that. Sean Stewart, not nearly as much success at Ohio State, but the biggest loser in this situation, unfortunately, was TJ Power. Again, a top 20 high school recruit who spends 1 year buried on the bench at Duke and then transfers to Virginia. All signs kind of indicated, hey, maybe this is a trendy sophomore breakout pick. Him and Stewart were these popular, like, hey, they were top recruits. Duke wanted them. Anybody who's wanted by Duke must be good, right? That's the mentality. They transferred to other programs where they're going to get more playing time. They're obvious picks to break out. Neither of them did. Stewart had his moments. TJ Power didn't. He just didn't have his moments. He averaged 1.3 points per game in 9.5 minutes for a bad Virginia team. I just think he was a miss. I mean, I maybe development's not linear. You never know. 6'9" players who can space the floor and shoot the three consistently are valuable. I get why he was a highly rated high school recruit, but he just doesn't look very good. Maybe Gonzaga sees something where they're like, you know what, we think we can unlock him. Maybe. This is not the type of player Gonzaga's taken a ton of chances on, although he is vaguely similar to Efton Reed, not in terms of play style, but Efton Reed was a top recruit who did play at LSU, but it wasn't particularly productive at LSU, not at the level that people thought he would be. Gonzaga thought, hey, I think we can develop him and turn him into a guy. Didn't end up happening for them. He went to Wake Forest. In fact, he actually just re-entered the transfer portal for his final year of eligibility. But I don't, TJ Power, somebody's going to take a chance on TJ Power. And it might work. It totally might work. But I don't think it's going to be Gonzaga. I don't think the fit is necessarily there. I don't think they're willing to take a player who, sure, the upside might be high, and sure, Gonzaga doesn't need a player to come in and play huge minutes right away, assuming EK Huff and Diani are all staying. But they would expect, if they're bringing in a power forward, they're expecting them to play. They need to fill Ben Gregg's role. They need to fill Michael Ajayi's role in some capacity. And Huff and EK can't be relied upon to play a whole lot more minutes than they did last year. And I don't think you're expecting Diani to play 30 minutes a game. So you need somebody who can come in and really give you minutes. And I don't think they can count on TJ Power to be that guy. So I would be surprised to see them pursue him here, although I'm very interested in where TJ Power ends up and if he's somebody who can kind of turn it around after a very lackluster start to his career. Last for Virginia, Christian Bliss. He's a 6'4" guard from New York. He did not play last year. I don't really see much of a connection here. Again, maybe Warley's like, yo, this dude's really good. Virginia screwed up not playing him. We have to go get him, and convinces the staff. Maybe. But a guy who wasn't able to get on the floor, who redshirted. And again, I didn't look super closely into it. Perhaps there was an injury situation with Bliss, but he was not a super highly regarded recruit. Didn't play last year, from New York, so doesn't really have any connections out here outside of Warley. So not a player that I'm paying a ton of attention to here. But I think it's kind of fun to look at this Virginia roster again with the Warley connection and kind of think, is there somebody that makes some sense to come out here outside of Jacob Cofie, who I think really makes a lot of sense for Gonzaga? And that was the main focus that I wanted for this show. But that's going to wrap it up for us today. We kind of had our conversation here on the Virginia transfers. We're going to do more stuff like this, whether it's full looks at entire teams' transfer portal classes, whether it's more specific targeted to certain player archetypes, like here are 3 backup point guards, here are 3 power forwards, here are 3, whomever. WCC players, we've already seen a few commit. Mikey Ratai goes to Baylor after a tremendous season for Oregon State last year. We'll see some more. It's got Austin Raps in the transfer portal from Portland. We saw Mo Odom go to Arizona State. So we'll kind of keep you up to date on some of that stuff as well. But again, that's going to wrap it up for today, folks. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Reminder to check out the bracket breakdown. If you have an Amazon Fire TV, just tell Alexa to play bracket breakdown or just fire it up. It's usually on the front screen. You can watch all of our videos there, getting you ready for the national championship and the Final Four coming up this week. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And until tomorrow, go Zags.